At this time, we'll have our agency spotlight entitled Bringing Them Back by Brad Howard, our Wildlife Management Division Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I think everyone's aware our spotlights for this year will revolve around our 75th anniversary and significant accomplishments. We had some discussion about who was going to go first and what we're going to do, and some the different ideas. And this is the idea that the Wildlife Division brought forward was certainly one of the biggest accomplishments was the recovery of our top big three big game species in the state. And so I think I'm going to jump in here and try to present some information that I hope you find interesting and appreciative. We have a library down in the 4th floor. I don't know if you guys have ever been down there, but I was looking through, and in the library, there are all the federal aid reports that date all the way back to actually pre-formation of the commission. And the federal aid reports are the reports that we give for our Pittman Robinson dollars. And as I was going through that, there was a book in there, and I was flipping through, and there's these pictures in there, and I looked at them, and this is a deer hunt. It's a big deal deer hunt on Holly Shelter. I don't know whether it was the first deer hunt at Holly Shelter. I'm not exactly sure, but that's Governor Broughton up there with the deer. Apparently he killed the first deer on that deer hunt. It was a big deal. So big that they actually interviewed him on the Raleigh AM radio station down here. And then they broadcast it the next week. They actually broadcast the deer hunt on the AM radio station. That's how big of a deal this was. So there were a lot of pictures, and I couldn't figure out exactly when this was. I was trying to figure out when it was. And as I was flipping through there, finally I figured out the date of this deer hunt. I want you to take a look at this right here and see the happy and the smiling faces. And there were a bunch of other pictures, but this is the date of this deer hunt. Thursday, December 4th, 1941. Wow. Now, at least one person said, wow, because they know the significance of that.
Really close.
That following Sunday would have been December the 7th, 1941, and the world would change forever. They were completely oblivious to that on this deer hunt that day. So, but it was a big deal to have a deer hunt, and it was so big that they interviewed the governor on the radio after he killed the first deer on the deer hunt. But I don't know. I just thought there was something when I saw that date. I said I have to include that in my presentation because it was just interesting. This is one of the reports I was talking about. This is the 1948-49 report. I couldn't find the 1947. This may have actually been the first report once the commission was formed. But this is a progress report from the Game Division to the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Projects. You know, it was very clear that the commission was formed for a purpose. And if you look at the table of contents of that, there's two things I want you to look at in this table of contents. First, they're talking about things that I still and my staff still stand up here and talk to you guys about today. Habitat management, species conservation. But if you notice on here, it's a very game species focus. It's very game species oriented. That was where the commission was at that time, managing the game species that we had, which would have been a lot of early successional small game species, but trying to figure out how to recover our big game species. So with that, I want to jump into the first one and the big one. Whitetail deer, well, I'm not going to say big one because they're all three pretty significant accomplishments, but the whitetail deer population, before restoration, by the late 1800s, deer populations were sparse across the Southeast. In fact, you could pretty much say for most of the Southeast, they were extirpated. There were no deer, except in pockets across the Southeast. North Carolina's remnant populations were over here on the coastal plain and a few spots in the mountains, which will become significant. This is a 1950s map, which will become significant in a few minutes. But in 1900, it's estimated that there were probably about 10,000 deer in North Carolina in 1900. Think about that. Think about the harvest numbers I presented to you yesterday. There was an estimated 10,000 deer. So our restoration era for deer started way before the formation of the commission. It started as early as 1890s, 1900 with Guilford Pinchot and Vanderbilt and those guys over there starting that restoration efforts to try to replenish the deer herd over in what was called the Pisgah Game Preserve in Henderson and Transylvania counties on what would become the first national forest, I believe, established east of the Mississippi. And that's and Pinchot is often called the father of forestry. He started the cradle of forestry, the forestry school, but he's also working on restoring the deer herds over there. From 28 to about 44, that Pisgah Game Preserve was growing deer, and those deer were used to stock much of western North Carolina, along with Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, and Mississippi. So it's a pretty significant source of deer that happened. At the same time, there was also on the Reynolds estate up in Surrey County, they were also doing the same thing up there. And this is actually a picture from our magazine of a deer trap on the Reynolds estate that was used to trap and move deer. So our deer restoration efforts occurred from about 45 to 87. Believe it or not, we were still putting some deer on the landscape all the way up until 1987. Deer populations grow fast in a locality, but it takes them a long time to spread across the landscape just by the nature of the does tend to be homebodies. They don't move out as fast. So it took a long time. Here's a map looking at where deer were reintroduced, and the source populations that they came from. I'll just let you look at that. I think it's important. A lot of people talk a lot of times about, oh, we got a lot of deer from here, we got a lot of deer from there. Most of our deer in North Carolina were restocked from North Carolina deer. So you can see that the populations that we drew from and the places that we stocked deer. I think this was the last one back in 87, if I'm not mistaken. I think we put deer out in Dare County was one of the last ones. So what have our deer populations done? Well, in 1900, I told you there were about 10,000. By 1970, there were a little bit less than 400,000. By 84, when we started doing some of the population reconstruction modeling and stuff, we were somewhere 670,000 deer. The last time we ran the model, which is about 2019, we're at 1.1 million deer estimated in the state of North Carolina. So from 1900 to 2019, we're up over 1 million deer. Now, that's a pretty good conservation success story. This is what we got so many deer now, we don't have those little maps to show us where the deer are. We have densities by county. And interestingly enough, remember back in the day that the deer populations were here and little segments here. Now, as the population has been restored and the deer have occupied what actually is probably better whitetail deer habitat through the Piedmont, you see our highest deer densities are in the Piedmont and foothills of the state. What is the impact of that restoration effort? Well, it's estimated that during the time of that 1950 to 1970s, in 1950 to $70, we probably spent somewhere around 1.2 million. I don't know what that converts to today exactly, but I do know this. Today in North Carolina, hunters spend approximately $311 million every year on deer hunting related expenses. So I think it was an investment well made. And whitetail deer are, of course, the most hunted game species in the state. So I think it was a good investment. So success story number one by the commission. Now let's move to the next of the big three big game species, turkeys. This is what the turkey population looked like in 1948. This is the distribution. I don't know what in 48, I'm not sure what the population was, but I thought this was interesting in this big group here, right here in the Piedmont in this area. And I thought that was kind of strange, but you see it up along the Roanoke and some scattered places in the mountains, but that's it. That's where we had turkeys in 1948. We really didn't jump into turkey restoration until starting, a little bit later. We got a little bit later start than some of the other southeastern states. In 1970, the turkey population was estimated at 2,000 turkeys. 2,000 turkeys in 1970. Well, I'll zone in on that date in a minute to let you know how that applies to me. But so about that time, we closed the fall hunting seasons, which was actually a big deal. Turkey hunting was fall hunting. We think only about spring hunting now, but at that point in time, you turkey hunted in the fall. So closing the fall turkey season was a big deal. We closed the fall turkey season. We moved to a more conservative spring hunting season. And then we began our trapping and relocation. The advent of the rocket net, we tried a lot of different things through the years. They tried game farm birds. They tried all different kind of things. But really the advent of the rocket net was the thing that sort of started the recovery of the turkey. So in our trapping and relocation efforts by staff with the commission, we trapped and relocated over 6,000 birds to 358 restoration sites. And this is what those restoration sites look like from 1950 through present day. And you see the evolution of that. We did 7 sites from 50 to 69, 19 sites through the 70s. Into the 80s, we were at 50 sites, the yellow stars, you see where we're going. And then from 1990 on, that's when we really kicked in. And that's when we started moving and relocating to 276 different sites where we put birds across the landscape. I should stop, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the partnership with the National Wild Turkey Federation in this effort. They were very instrumental in assisting the commission and the state in this effort. So you know, as they were across the country in terms of turkey population recovery. So back again to the distribution maps. Here's what it looked like in 75. Strangely, interestingly enough, 48. This population has started to diminish here. There's not many birds. Growing a little bit over here in the mountains. Starting to get some restored populations by 1975. And then in 95, you see the state starting to fill in. And then, of course, now we got enough turkeys that now we just track the turkeys by density per county. They're in every county in the state. And that's the 2020 turkeys per square mile density. And I think we're all familiar with our increase in the spring harvest. The last 2 years, we've seen the big, huge increase. We'll see how that plays out in the next couple of years and see if that harvest starts to balance out with the long-term average harvest. But our harvest of turkeys continues to increase across the state. So I'm gonna tell. I told you I was going to tell you how 1970 related to me. So in 1970, remember I said there were an estimated 2,000 birds. 1970 was the year I was born. So literally in my lifetime, we've gone from 2,000 birds in North Carolina to an estimated 270,000 turkeys. So I would say, again, another commission-driven conservation success story. Our third one, and maybe the biggest one of all. I don't know. Everybody can vote. Colleen will say this is the biggest one of all. I don't know. The black bear population. Before restoration, by the 1950s, our black bears were extirpated from the Piedmont completely. There were no bears in the Piedmont at all. There were simply remnant populations in the coast and the mountains. This is what the 1971 occupied range looked like. We had population of bears in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and some of the thick pines and precocions of the coast and the national forest in the mountains. It was so bad that in 75 they proposed to list the black bear as a species of special concern. That's how few bears we had in the state. In the early 70s, we started our bear restoration efforts, and it was really a multi-pronged approach to it. The first thing we had to do was get some regulations in place. We had crazy bear regulations. We had different county seasons. It was just completely unchecked. It was all over the place. Commission took the reins, put the regulations in place to slow this bear harvest and protect our bear populations. We started collecting data because, believe it or not, we didn't know a lot of the things we take for granted today. So we started a lot of different data collection efforts. And then, you have to give kudos to our law enforcement staff who took those regulations and really started enforcing this, what was kind of unregulated bear hunting up until then. And so we put those three things into motion to stop the harvest rates as they were, and then to slow the illegal harvest and those kind of things down. And then as we moved through, we had to do a couple other things. First off, research. Like I said, a lot of stuff we take for granted that we know about the bears today. In as early as the 70s, we didn't know. We didn't know reproductive rates. We didn't know habitat use. We didn't know these things. So we collaborated with Tennessee and Georgia in one of the first sort of multi-state, tri-state bear studies. That was something that wasn't really going on in those times. And we all got together and said, hey, this is one big bear population in the mountains. Let's study them. We've done more than 24 research projects in the state, not us specifically. There have been more than 24 research projects done in the state of North Carolina over the last three decades that have contributed significantly to the understanding of black bear populations. And as we mentioned yesterday, Commissioner Fumble, you talked about the sanctuary establishment. That was probably one of the most critical things that happened with the recovery of our bear population. And John Collins, our bear biologist at that time, came up with the idea, working with other biologists as well, with establishing these sanctuaries where we would protect a core group of female bears across the landscape to allow them to reproduce and put bears out into the landscape. To say that has been a success is an understatement. Our bear populations are booming, especially in the mountains and in the coast. And to the point that we have the discussions we have about opening up harvest opportunities and those kind of things. So, but it was a novel idea. They had to convince the bear hunters to buy into this. They literally took lands away from them and said, you can't hunt those anymore. These were public lands. And they, of course, contributed to the effort and bought into that. And we certainly recovered our black bear population. Also should probably mention that the fact that, reforestation efforts in the mountains certainly helped with that as well. In the early part of the century, that's what the mountains of North Carolina looked like. They were completely cut to the dirt. And so over time, while some of our forests over there in the West don't necessarily make very good deer or grouse habitat, they still make pretty good bear habitat. So the bears are occupying those reforested areas. Our last bear range map was 2010. We're scheduled to update one soon. This is now the occupied range. This down here shows you the 71 occupied range. Now there's where we are in 2010. And I can say now that this whole area is filled in. All this area is filled in. The bears are definitely moving. So occupied range is definitely expanding across the state. There's, our bear harvest estimated population and harvest trends that you guys see annually, and we know we continue to increase from that. So where are we with our population estimates? We're now at 7,000 plus bears for sure in the mountains, probably approaching 8,000. And if we continue this 6% growth rate, we'll be hitting 9,000 bears in the mountains in the very near future. And we want to try to slow that down. Coastal Bear Management Unit, we're at least 9,500 plus bears. We want to do this population estimate that we talked about in upcoming years to get a little zone in on that a little bit better. But that puts us at about 16,000 plus black bears in the state of North Carolina currently. So I think that's the third significant conservation effort of the commission. And as you know, with our bears now, we are a destination place. We have the largest black bears in North America. We're a destination place, not just for hunting bears, but for viewing bears. Lots of people go to the mountains in North Carolina, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, those areas to go and watch bears. We certainly know how many people go to the coast to take pictures and observe and watch bears. And we certainly know our rich bear hunting tradition, both in the mountains and in the coast. So it's really, really another awesome conservation success story. I'm gonna mention just real quickly a couple notable other species. And there's so many that we could talk about, but there's otters. We recovered otters. There's wood ducks. We recovered wood ducks. Along with the wood ducks, we restored beaver populations, which led to the recovery of the wood duck. Raccoons, believe it or not, in the early part of the career, David Cobb can maybe even remember. I mean, we were still stocking raccoons in the mountains. Raccoons are fully recovered, mind you, in case you were wondering. Bobcats as well, another species that are doing well. So there's so many that we could check the box on of what we've done in the last 75 years. And so I think it's awesome. I think you can look at the pictures. This is the deer hunt at Holly Shelter and all the smiling faces. This is an early bear hunt getting ready to go, and our turkeys and deer. So I think we can really be proud of the accomplishments of the commission. I think the challenges certainly remain ahead of us in managing these now abundant species and how we do that with our ever abundant human populations. But I would certainly say this is a good jump off for 75 years of conservation success.